Today we have some good and some bad news for the Death Korps of Krieg, a shiny new regimental doctrine, but also the loss of many units from the new Forge World book. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics for a bit of discussion around the previewed rules for Death Korps of Krieg coming out in the Imperial Armour Compendium this weekend. With redoing all the Forge World units, Games Workshop have had the chance to rebalance things a bit, which could mean quite a lot of good things for the Guard Forge World choices, as at the moment very few compare with the Codex choices, but one thing I was particularly interested in is what they were going to do with the Death Korps of Krieg, who have basically received chronic neglect ever since their index came out at the start of 8th. Today in a Warhammer community article, Games Workshop have shared the Death Korps of Krieg new doctrine from the book. In the previous rules, if Death Korps of Krieg suffered any casualties from shooting attacks, then they would ignore them for the purposes of morale. They also had a few different tweaks to their infantry squads, most notably being Weapon Skill 3 where Standard Guardsmen are Weapon Skill 4, and throughout all of 8th edition they'd have to pay 1 extra point for the privilege of these two rules, even if it did mean that they didn't get another regimental doctrine. Now though, their regimental doctrine, Cult of Sacrifice, has been changed to the following. First of all, they basically ignore any modifiers for combat attrition tests. So if you do fail a morale test, one Death Korps model will run, and then everyone else will only ever run on 1s, regardless of whether the squad has been cut down to less than half strength, or if the enemy has any fancy modifiers to combat attrition going on. Secondly, they've given a little bit of a buff to Death Korps characters and vehicles, which didn't have any rule previously. If a character or vehicle with this doctrine is destroyed by an attack made by an enemy model, and the model didn't explode, roll a d6, and on the roll of a 4+, it gets to make one final attack with a ranged weapon, or one final attack with a melee weapon. In either case, if it has a damage profile, the model's considered to only have 1 wound remaining for the purposes of that. So for me it's a bit questionable as to whether this is stronger or weaker than the previous. We don't yet know whether the infantry will be retaining their weapon skill 3+, or whether it might get nerfed, or whether they might be going down to 5 points or not. For me, I think that will be a sensible move to bring them in line with the rest of the guard. For infantry, I think that this will be slightly weaker, as shooting morale casualties tended to be the more important, so you're basically going from ignoring the casualties to suffering some morale casualties even if it isn't very many. So perhaps a slight nerf to battle line infantry squads, but really morale isn't the biggest issue for the guard at the moment anyway, not compared with what it was last edition, so arguably a slight nerf, but not a very terrible one on infantry. For characters and vehicles though, I'd say it is a buff to them, seeing as they didn't get any rule before, but it's only a very small buff compared with some of the other Astra Militarum regiments. I don't think that the character dying mechanic is going to be all that meaningful, even if you gave a guard commander a power fist or something, which in general most people tend not to bother with. It'd still be quite weak to get one attack on a 4+ that's only hitting on a 4+ if they happen to die in melee. I think the extra attacks from characters are rarely ever going to be relevant. Vehicles could have a little bit more promise though, I think. Though it is a bit sad that for any guard vehicles hitting on a 4+ that have a vehicle damage table, it means that if they do get these extra shots, they'll only be hitting on 6s. It means that they're not going to be doing all that much damage when they go down. Though I think a few niche cases could be better. Any vehicle that doesn't have a damage table under grade could be good. It will be particularly useful on flamers as they auto-hit, and a last round of shooting from Death Korps tank commanders could at least be fairly scary. Even hitting on 5s, a last blast with a demolisher cannon could actually be enough to kill an enemy unit or two. So overall, a slight nerf to Death Korps infantry, and a slight buff to Death Korps characters and tanks, though not a particularly meaningful one. I'm afraid just for the doctrine alone, I don't think it's very powerful. I wouldn't choose this above Cadian or Katachan or one of the custom regiment combinations, and I think it's still going to have to fall to the Death Korps unique units to actually draw people to want to play the army. Unfortunately, it does seem that there will be a few less of the Death Korps unique units to play with now. Games Workshop does seem to be implementing the no model, no rules policy, even for certain Death Korps units that did get a points cost in 9th edition. There are quite a few omissions from the list of Death Korps units. This is the full Astra Militarum Forge World range in 9th, and it seems that if it hasn't made it onto this list, then it means that you're not going to be able to field it. First of all, an interesting omission is the Death Korps infantry squad. I guess that means that the Death Korps infantry will be represented by the standard infantry squad from Codex Astra Militarum now. I guess that means that they won't have the weapon skill 3+ anymore, but on the whole I would still say that that's a buff rather than a nerf. I'd rather have the Death Korps infantry be 5 points a model and hit on 4s, rather than be 6 points and hit on 3s. Even if you hit a little bit more accurately in close combat, they still weren't really going to get much done against most meaningful targets. Besides them though, it does appear that there's quite a lot of things that aren't going to be appearing in the Forge World Index, many of which will be sorely missed. Grenadier Storm Squads are gone, I guess you'd have to use Scion rules to represent them now. Death Rider Commissars are missing, the Mars Alpha Levum Russ is gone, but I suspect that will mean that Death Korps get to fail the standard pattern of Lehman Russ now, which isn't necessarily that much of a bad thing. The Quartermaster Cadre is missing, so is Caris Benner, the Storm Chimera, and the Centaur Carrier. To be honest, I don't think it's particularly surprising that these are gone. Games Workshop's policy of if they don't make the model anymore, then they don't make new rules for it has been going back a while now, but it's always sad to lose options that you did have previously. Hopefully at some point they'll get round to at least making some Legends rules for them, and give them a final home in 9th edition alongside some Elysians. Possibly a bit of a thankless task for Games Workshop, but I think it will be better than giving them no love whatsoever. Despite these losses, I am quite hopeful that Death Korps will now be able to field the full range of Astra Militarum units. I'm hoping that they're going to treat them a bit more like a Codex Space Marine supplement rather than some sort of weird standalone faction all on their own that can use a few guard datasheets but not most of them. I know they tried to limit the army to exactly what they thought was most fluffy for it before, but I think it would be quite nice of them to enable players to add certain units to their army if they really wanted them. If you did want to use some Manticores or Wyverns in your Death Korps army, for example, where previously the rules technically wouldn't let you before. Finally, one slightly interesting thing that I noticed from this list is that the Hades Breaching Drill doesn't appear to be listed alongside the other Death Korps units in this section. I'm kind of hoping that it might be allowed to be used with other guard regiments now, and not just the Death Korps of Krieg. It's really quite a cool model, and I think it would be quite good fun to use in other guard forces, and could be interesting to put some deep striking infantry on the table. So I must admit, not the greatest amount of good news for the Death Korps at the moment. It is nice to see them get a bit of attention, but it does seem that their army list has taken some hefty flack while they got it. I'm looking forward to going through the datasheets and points costs though. Hopefully some of their units will be stronger again to make up for some of the things that they've lost. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more videos like this. I will be hoping to cover some of the datasheets in the Imperial Armour Compendium once it comes out, so let me know if there's anything that you'd particularly like to see. If you've been enjoying these videos and you'd like to help me make more of them, then I'd just like to mention that I do have a Patreon page which you can find down in the video description below. Making all of these videos does take quite a bit of time, so if you are enjoying regularly, then any support is massively appreciated. Channel Patreons get to see one video early each week. There are regular votes and polls to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and all patrons automatically get entered into the Auspex Tactics prize giveaway with the chance to win some big model kits every single month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.